Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I'm not right at the moment. It's difficult to put my finger on it, but I'm going to blame my booster jab that I've had because I can't think of any other reason. That was on Friday, and final day, Saturday morning, okay, arm a bit achy, but seemed okay. And as the day wore on, I just started feeling yucky. Not enough to sort of retire to bed and draw the curtains or anything, it just didn't feel right. And I thought, that's all right, it'll be fine by tomorrow, and it's not. So I just feel yuck, drained, incredibly tired, but not dysfunctional tired. And unfortunately this morning I had to go around my sister's, I had to deal with some paperwork and stuff, which is still going on. It's a pain. Be over soon. And ended up starting to chat with my brother-in-law, then my sister, talking about our memories of childhood, and suddenly it's late in the day and I haven't got my filming done. So I hate to think when this is going to get posted, be halfway through the evening by the time it's processed, so it's not going to be hugely long. And I had to come up with something I can not have to concentrate on to any great extent, which is, I feel a bit guilty about that, but that's what the Sunday chat's going to be. And it's going to be a bit unusual. I've got the laptop here, you can't see it, but I've opened up my notes, and basically, starting at the top, I'm just going to go down through the types of orchids I've got and talk about how I look after them, what the differences are more than anything, because a lot of it will be the same, especially this time of year. We're into winter now. I can't keep saying we're going into winter. It's into November now. It is winter time. So that's what I thought I'd do. And you'll have to put up with scruffy as well. I haven't had a shave, and so be it. I'm just not, don't feel right. And after coming home from my sister, I thought, well, that's it. I'm just going to sit in the chair now and relax for the rest of the day. And then I suddenly thought, we haven't done our Sunday video yet, have we? I'll do what I can. So that's the theory. As far as stuff going on is concerned, I have a niggle in my mind that's bad. I just hope I'm, they say, plan for the worst, this, that and the other. The agency that's dealt with my credit check and ID checks and all that sort of stuff, they sent me an email late on Thursday to say all their checks were now completed and their final report had been sent back to the letting agent. And I haven't heard anything from them. And so far they've been right there with anything I need to do or anything I need to know. So all day Friday and Saturday, and they haven't got in touch. So what I hope they're not doing is that for some reason I'm now excluded and they're getting back in touch with the others to see if they want to come back in. Worst case scenario. But if I don't get this place, I'll just go back to square one and start again. But I may be just thinking bad thoughts when they're not necessary. So we shall see. So that's that. Mum's funeral went off okay on Wednesday, as far as those sort of events can go. You can't say we all had a good time. It's not that sort of thing, is it? It went off smoothly and as planned. And on the day, I don't think any family members had a flaming row or fisticuffs like you often get at those sort of do's. We had none of that. And we went back to the place afterwards and had something to eat. That wasn't good. I had nothing to do with organising that, but the place we were at, they'd put out sandwiches. We said that we will wait for everybody to get back. They will come back in stages. And then after a while we will get on and eat. And they'd left sandwiches uncovered, so the top few sandwiches started to curl up at the edges, which wasn't too clever. And my sister, the last one you want to upset, found a great big long hair in her sandwich that wasn't hers. So that got her goat up. But anyway, it was the sort of do where you don't want to complain, you just want to let stuff go. So anyway, that was okay. So that's done. The inheritance tax forms, I have now completed them. I have to take photocopies of the supporting evidence, and unfortunately, I've run out of black ink on the printer. Duh, that's the last thing I needed. So I've ordered some. When that arrives, I can get the rest of that photocopying done. Yeah, the paperwork is almost complete now. There's a big fat envelope there to be posted. That hopefully completes my dealings with that company. Unless they come back with any more questions, that should be over and done with. The only thing I think that's going to be outstanding by the end of the week, bearing in mind the Inheritance Tax forms will be posted off during this week. The only thing that will be left outstanding to do is to deal with Mum's shares, and we can't do with that until we've got probate. And we've got bad news. One of the estate agents that valued this place phoned me up and said, just phoning up really to see what you're up to, what's going on. And I said, well, you have to bear in mind when I saw you, my mum wasn't expected to last much longer. Well, we had the funeral on Wednesday. She lasted a lot longer, so we've only just had the funeral. He said, oh, sorry, no, blah, blah, blah. And he said, only I thought I'd better tell you, some investigations recently have said that for whatever reason that doesn't seem to be justified, the conveyancing side of selling a house is currently taking 3 months plus from the point you get it on the market to the point you complete. And he said, I highly recommend that you market the property as a probate property to get people to look. And if there's somebody who says, yep, we want that place, they will have to be prepared to wait to exchange contracts for us to get probate. As he said, you know, probate's going to take you 2 to 3 months from the point you send the forms off, and that's if it all goes through smoothly. So he said, you know, perhaps you ought to get going on the other front, because if you wait until you've got probate to market the property, you could be adding another 3 months on the end of that. And it's just all getting... It worries me that things take so long. In this day and age, when you've got online communications, emails, text, you've got all these facilities, and yet there's stuff, you know, I mean, like local authority searches, I'm told, can take up to 6 weeks. What are they doing? You know? Anyway, so that's what's happening with stuff. What else? That's about all on that front, really. It's progressing. I've dealt with all the companies I need to deal with, and we're either waiting for something or it's finished, if you see what I mean, and can go no further until we get probate. So it's all sort of in hand. So I can forget that soon and just not have any more to do with that. Orchid societies are winding up. Now I don't mean winding up finishing, I mean winding up in doing stuff again, face to face. That puts an element of workload on me. I still haven't started our 3 times a year magazine, which should have been out a month and a half ago. I haven't even started it yet. I will have to get on with that, I really will. The trouble is, it's not something I can give to somebody else to do. So I'm going to have to get on with that. And I've got meetings of both societies coming up, committee meetings for both, one of which is a separate event, one of which is joined together. So there's stuff now that I'm committed to attending and being part of that's coming up. Not in the mood today, I'm really not, sorry. We will plod on. Because if I go and sit down and get comfortable and think I'll have a break for a bit, I'll be asleep, seriously. Right, so the theory is, I'm just going to go down through the list, stopping on genera, mainly. Might be an odd single orchid, but my list starts off with, I haven't got any yet. Strictly speaking, I was just going to say I haven't got any A's, you're careful, behave yourselves, but I have. But they're in a separate section, we'll get to that in a minute. But as you know, I have Aerangis, they're A, they should be first. No, they're not, they're Vandaceous. So they're actually last. But they're first in the last section. Does that make sense? Probably. So we start with Brassias. Now I don't lump all my Oncidiums together, but then I haven't really separated them out properly. But we've got a couple of Brassias, Oncidium types up the higher light end than most of the others. I would say they're probably at the highest light requirement. and technically I would say a little bit less than most Cattleyas, so just under the Cattleyas. And the reason why we discuss light is with an awful lot of orchids, the light level will dictate whether they bloom or not, or how well they bloom in some cases. So they might bloom but not as well as they could, depending on light level. So two of those, both came from Burnham's. I think they both came around the same time as well. What does it say? 2019 Burnham's. Yeah, both gone on the same day at a trip to Burnham's. So then underneath that we've got a Bretonia, or Miltonias as it once was. I think it's that way round, might be the other way around. That's Shelob Tolkien. Now that's more Brassia than anything else, but not strictly speaking a true Brassia. It's got Miltonia mixed in with it. Nonetheless, Miltonias are not dramatically different to Brassias. The chatter of the helicopter. And that's funny, I actually like that sound. I don't know why. And I love the sound of the Chinook, you know, the egg whisk in the sky with the two lots going, especially when they beat against each other. You can tell that. It can be 5 miles away, you can still go, oh, there's a Chinook around. The others are not quite so distinctive, but that one's been going around most of the day. I think they might be doing paid flights from Bournemouth Airport. You can have I think it's 20-minute helicopter flight, which takes you down the river, out over the harbour, out round the Isle of Wight and back over Dorset. 20-minute sort of round trip. I believe that's probably what that is. So where do we get to? Right, we then move on to bulbophyllums. I have one, and it's Homilio. We think it's highly likely, like 95% certain. It was mislabeled when I got it. Blooms were just very wrong, and when it bloomed it was a matter of searching for that particular colour bulbophyllum and just going through all the flipping great list of bloom, you know, pictures that come up, and found one that was spot on. So that's what I've called it till somebody contradicts. And I've only got one of those, and that is an undetermined light level. You find different information. So I've classed it as semi-bright. In fact, it's just up above my head with its back facing the brightest light. So it's in a relatively bright position, but not my brightest position. A lot of bulbophyllums are actually shade lovers, but it's such a vast genus that they vary an awful lot. There's cool growers, intermediate, warm, higher light, lower light, deep shade, constantly wet, like to dry in between. There's everything in that genus, it's just vast. So that's that one. Then we get down into the Cattleya Alliance, and in amongst there, it varies, but you know, there's sort of Lalias, Brassolalias, Lalia Cattleyas, all that alliance, depending on the content of a hybrid, can have 3 elements of the names, so it can vary quite a bit. You tend to find that the Lalias, most, not all, there's 2 distinct types of Lalias, I can't remember, but there's literally a lot were changed to Cattleyas, and those that stayed were because they were a different, I think they came from a different place, don't quote me. I'm sure somebody will tell me. Some people take great delight in telling me things like that, and I don't mind, you know. Can't know everything, can you? Although some people think they do, I believe. Yeah, so I've got quite an assortment, and probably most are just hybrids, no idea at all. There's a good smattering, and when you don't know anything about a plant, it's just a Cattleya type, you don't know what's in it. Now, sometimes you can have a guess at some of its elements because of the shape of the bloom, or whether it's a bifoliate, yeah, these types of things. But up the higher light requirement tends to be the Lalias, and most Cattleyas then come to the next light level down, which is normal Cattleya light, which is pretty high light. This is pretty good light, but it's not high light. That's Vandaceous, or most Vandaceous. But Vandas are classed as high light. Rhinantheras are high light in the main. Yeah. So Cattleyas, 1 stage down. Yeah, a little bit less. And you can get away with even less, and some of them will still bloom, because some people grow them quite happily in the home where they don't get that level of light, and they still bloom okay. So, right, that's down there. I'm going to have to scroll down a bit And in amongst there, we've got some oddities. We've got the Avanagara, which is now called something else, the apple blossom. Now, you give that normal Cattleya light, you may well singe your leaves. I know somebody who did. Guilty. So that one needs a little bit less than your standard Cattleya stuff. Probably one of the elements in it is a lower light requirement. Yeah, I mean, I've got RLCs, I've got SLCs. The R is the Rhyncho bit, the SLC is the Sophronitis bit, the L is the Laelia bit. It's funny, some of them, when you get an SLC, and all the Sophronitis have been reclassified as Cattleyas, a lot of the Laelias have, so you've effectively got a Cattleya. It does make a joke of it, doesn't it? Anyway, that's those. There's epidendrums in there as well. I got an what is that? Oh, God knows. Epilaleo Cattleya. So they do mix and match. And then we come on to my Dendrobium section, and we have, these are divided up into types within, if you see what I mean. They're all Dendrobiums, but I've got winter resting types as a section. And in amongst those, I mean, I've gone over winter resting, but you've got things like a phyllum, delicatum, Friedrichianum, winter rest but not cold. So there are differences. Lindleyi, Jenkinsii, Lodigesii, although they're only kikis, so I don't totally rest those. My Nestor. Yeah, so we've got those, and a Primulinum as well. So they're what I class as true resters, except for the kikis. Don't rest kikis, they'll probably shrivel. There's not enough plant content to take no water for that length of time, they're too small. And then I've got my Nobili types, again, winter resters. The hybrids, especially the more complex hybrids, you can get away without resting them, and most of them will still bloom. They might not bloom quite as well, but they'll still bloom. With Dendrobiums, I'll only stop when the light level changes. In the growing season, Dendrobiums don't need high light. Most of them come either from deciduous forests or tropical rainforests. They have a canopy of leaves over them. So they might get glimpses of light through the gaps now and again, but they're not in bright light. And they will happily grow away in that level of light. Most of the winter resters like brighter light in the winter compared with the summer. And therein lies a little trick you can play. If you give them a bit of extra shade in the summer months, because you can't give them the real bright light in the winter, then the light that you do give them in the winter to the plant is bright light. It's a trick. Yeah, so that's that. And obviously most Dendrobiums are classed as drier in winter. Quite honestly, most orchids are drier in winter unless they're constantly moist. Now, I haven't got that many of those. So then we've got the black hair types. No winter rest for those. A bit drier in winter, totally dependent on what temperature you can maintain. If you can keep your temperatures up at their growing season level, there is no real rest, because they will carry on growing. They'll put up new growths in December and January if they've got the temperature and somewhere near the day lengths. What lets them down in the UK is the day length shortens right down. So even though they might have the temperature to grow, they're going to slow down or almost stop because the day length's not there. So don't keep them wet. If they're not growing, don't keep them wet. Very easy to rot roots on black hair types. Same goes for Latoria types, and same goes for Phalaenopsis types. If they're not growing, the roots will rot if they get soggy. All three of those. And all three of those are a bit drier in winter depending on your temperatures. They don't need a sudden increase in light. Most of these are coming from tropical forests areas, so their light level doesn't change dramatically between the dry season and the wet season. And if they're from tropical rainforests, that dry season's not that dry. Otherwise the trees would dump their leaves, wouldn't they? So they wouldn't be able to support that. All that greenery up there takes moisture. Yeah. So that's those. I've got one antelope type. And quite honestly, I just lumped that in with the Latorias and the black hair types. I could be wrong. That's an unflowered, relatively new blue type. And then I've got others. What have we got in there then? We've got Hercoglossums in there, Hibiki, Kaneko, one I can't say, Moniliform, Tetragonum, Tortilli, Victoria Regina. And they all get slightly different care, but you wouldn't notice here. Most of those would be classed as drier in winter, but some of them are cool growers. You have to bear in mind with the Dendrobiums, you've got warm growers. I think the antelope types come into that. High-end intermediate, proper intermediate in the middle there somewhere, so they can take lower temperatures in the winter but not too cold. And then there are genuine cool growers that can take quite cool temperatures in the winter. But it's not essential. That's just what they get where they come from. They can do without it. It's not an essential thing. I mean, my Victoria Regina is a cool grower. Yeah? Well, if it needed those cool temperatures to grow, to bloom, it's been in bloom for the last 6 weeks. It didn't get cold, did it? It's in the middle of the summer. Oh, summer into autumn. So that's that lot. We've then got Masdevallias, etc. this section. This basically is Restrepias, Masdevallias and my one Dracula. Less light than most other orchid types, but it has been deemed more recently that some Masdevallias do actually grow in areas where some of them even get direct sun. Open grassy areas, some come from there. Some of them come from quite deep shade, heavy montane forests, deep cover, misty, rainy, all that sort of stuff. But it varies a bit. But I would class anything in that section as lower light than anything else I've got. They are my lower light orchids. Nonetheless, the shade netting will be coming off soon. They'll get some sun straight through the glass, but it'll be very weak sun here in the UK in November and on into December, January. So my lowest light levels, all of those like high humidity. Some you can get away with not having the high humidity and they'll still do reasonably well. They just do better if they've got the high humidity. The ones I have noticed, given the scrolls and ancient tablets and all that sort of stuff, the Restrepias out of my collection are classed as the highest humidity requiring orchids that I've got. 90–95% plus, and they love it. I keep mine at 75% daytimes, and they all grow fine and they all bloom nicely. Again, can't always believe what you read, but then you could stop and think, but if they did get that 90–95% during the daytime when they're growing, would they grow that bit better? The answer is probably yes. But I'm not trying it because it'll probably do a lot of my other orchids in, because it starts generating rot. The higher your humidity, the more the airflow becomes important. And the problem is with airflow in the winter when the temperatures are low, that can almost constitute a draft if you're not careful. No orchids like being in a draft. So that's that set. Then we've got the Miltonias. Now, to all intents and purposes, they can be treated like most Oncidiums. They are medium to higher light, not Cattleya light, less than that, higher than some, but I would say not quite as high as the Brassias. Yeah, so reasonable light for those. They like quite reasonable light. They're not a shade lover by any means. Temperatures intermediate. Some are heading up towards the warm end. I don't think there's any cooler growers, given from where they come from, but there could be. And a good selection. There's quite a few species in amongst those that are sometimes quite easy to come by. They just turn up. And hybrids in amongst there as well. And Miltonias are used across the Oncidium alliance for hybridization purposes. Yeah, so they're used a lot. They hybridize with Miltoniopsis, with Oncidiums, true Oncidiums, Odontoglossums, Brassias, what's the other ones? Cotyledons. So a nice middle of the road Oncidium type. Doesn't need high temperatures, doesn't like to get too cold, doesn't need high light, needs reasonable light. That's my levels. High light, good light, reasonable light. These are technical definition, and don't forget they're metric levels of light, not this imperial rubbish. Right, so that's them. Then below them we get onto the Miltoniopsis. Now in the Oncidium alliance these are an exception. These are montane forest growers in the main. Don't like light, bright light, not good at all them. They are more up the shadier end and cool growers, except for the odd one or two species that will tolerate a bit of heat, but they prefer to do without it, if you see what I mean. And those ones that will tolerate a bit more heat, I think it's the Miltoniopsis, Phalaenopsis is one of them. Those that tolerate a bit more heat and get that, you know, in their daytime temperatures, often like it a bit brighter as well. Yeah, they seem to go together. But I mean, my Miltoniopsis, I think there's only 5 species available now. One's declared extinct. So there's only 5 left. I've got 3 of them and a primary cross between 2 of them, so I'm not doing bad. And they don't do that well for me because of the heat. If I get this new place that I'm going to, and it is a north-facing conservatory, they will grow better from now on because they won't get the heat. If the sun doesn't hit the glass, it's not going to get hot. And if it doesn't get hot, I don't have to spend an awful lot of money trying to keep it cool. These are good. But then some of the plants I've got at the warmer end, like the Rhinaanthus and the Vandas, they might not grow as well because their daytime temperatures might be a bit lower than they actually like. We will see. We haven't got there yet. Oncidium Alliance, all sorts of weird and wonderful names in here. Many of them are not relevant anymore. They were once. Aliciara, Bealara, Burgeriara thing, Nelly Islas. Cambria. Cambria was a genuine thing once. It was actually a combination of 3 of the Oncidium types, and it was genuine. And I think one of the famous ones is Cambria plush. Nonetheless, if elements within that makeup of that name change and are reclassified, the name doesn't ring true anymore. But Cambria has been adopted by an awful lot of nurseries, and they tend to think that Cambria is synonymous with orchid. No. But you will often find a mass-produced Oncidium type in the stores that just says Cambria. Not really, it's just they use it as another word. I've got a Mexicoa, that thing, little Oncidium. It's just got a, you know, different name. And then we've got the Odontoglossums. Watch those because they have been used extensively in hybridization. They are genuine cool growers. I don't think there's many exceptions. And it was quite a large genus originally, and they've got reclassified as Oncidiums. So they've lost that identity, unfortunately, and because they are cooler growers, their identity identifies their care. So if you've got an odont crossed with an Oncidium, it's going to have a cooler feel. It would like a cooler feel than just an Oncidium. But without that identity, it's an Oncidium cross. You've lost that element of care, which annoys me. Odonts are some of my favourite orchids. So they're in there, but most of them have lost their identity. And then we've got things like Oncostelli, the Zygopetalums are effectively Oncidiums. They were once classed as Oncidiums. Tolumnias are Oncidiums. They were once classed as Oncidiums and got given their own genus. So we've got all those to add in. We've got Roscioglossums. I've got one of those. Well, that's a lower light, slightly cooler grower than some, but it varies enormously. The Oncidium Alliance starts at cool to cold and goes right up to warm growers. It starts with requiring good light down to heavy shade. All that. So sort that lot out then, especially when you're not going to get a proper ID a lot of the time. Good luck with that. Right, that's that set. We've then got Derrick's plants, which are, there's a Coelogeny in there, which I don't really know what I'm doing with, but I haven't had to do much with it because it hasn't grown yet. It hasn't started to grow yet. It's got some roots, it's done that. There's Odontoglossums in there, Miltonia crosses, Odontodias. That's Odontoglossum crossed with Miltonias, I believe. Odontodia, probably. Mainly cool growers here, some Oncidiums, but they tend to be the cooler ones. There's a Wilsonaria in there. Tiger Brew Yellow, that one's called. Right, then I've got my Tolumnias. Now, although they were once they're still in the Oncidium Alliance effectively, but they've been given their own genus. And that's new, so I don't think they're mucking about with them. These are the Tolumnias. We'll leave those alone for a bit. And quite honestly, that's a good idea because they're not like normal Oncidiums. They really are not anything like other Oncidiums. They have thick, fleshy, succulent type leaves, nothing like the wispy, grass-like leaves of a lot of Oncidiums. So they are different. Care-wise with those, they come from, although it's the Caribbean region, the common denominator is not too far from the coast. So even on the mainland, there's still more found around coastal regions on the islands and things like that. So cooler sea breezes, even though the sun's bright and out a lot of the time. Higher humidity near the water, yeah, and get periods where there isn't any rain. So they're adapted to drought. That's probably why they've got the thick, fleshy, succulent leaves. And they get most of their moisture in those periods when there isn't much rain about from morning dew. And they've adapted to collect that by running their roots along under the twigs, which is where the dew runs. Yeah. As it forms, it goes round to the underside of the branches and drips off. You don't need to be in the Caribbean to see that happening. Just get up in the morning, get out there and have a look. You'll find some of that. So yeah, they don't like to get cold. They prefer to be a reasonable medium temperature sort of thing, intermediate. They don't mind getting warm as long as they don't lose their hydration. They do like to go dry in between watering. And if your temperatures drop down, that period of dry between waterings can go on for a few days. Don't panic. A lot of people that got Tolumnias think, I must water them every day. Go steady if your temperatures start to drop and your day length shorten. You rot your roots, like with many other orchids. Right, then we come down to Phalaenopsis. Now, I am not the world's leading expert on these little blighters. I have some. We have a project running, which is growing some indoors, that's had a few added to, because there used to be a few out here. The only one out here now is a mounted one. That's not going to do very well indoors with central heating, so that one's going to have to put up with the cold. I've owned it quite a few years, and it hasn't pegged out in the winter yet, and I don't let my temperatures drop down quite so low in the winter. So it'll make it. It'll just stop growing for 2, 3, 4 months, and then it'll pick up again. It's not doing ridiculously bad. I mean, it's grown some nice new leaves relatively recently. It's got a pretty good root system that very recently has stopped growing. So the root tips, there's one very strong root tip there, but apart from that, most of the roots are starting to sort of seal over at the end. That's the lower night temperatures are doing that. But nonetheless, it's pushed on quite well, and I do believe, well, blow me, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see that. That in between my fingers on that leaf joint is a spike. So that's going to bloom. Hey, jolly good. Beautiful little blooms on that. It's the only reason I've kept it. So we've got some blooms to come. Right, that's that one. All the others are in the house, and I'll probably do an update on those in the not too distant future, because at least one of them's got a spike. I don't look at them that often, but one's got a spike anyway. So that's my Phalaenopsis. Generally speaking, these need to stay warm. They're not too fussed if the humidity drops down a bit, so they're perfect for growing in the home. They don't need high light. They're perfect for growing in the home. And depending on what media you've got them in, they would prefer to get almost dry or even bone dry in between waterings. So actually they're not a bad orchid for either lazy people, people with a poor memory, or people who work for a living who can only do their plants at the weekend. Yeah? So a perfect home orchid to grow it in the home. So that's Phalaenopsis. Some of the species like a bit more light than would be generally accepted. Some say that with the mass-produced jobbies, that a drop in temperature at night during the autumn months will trigger the blooming, My attitude is if their inbuilt makeup has an annual cycle that triggers blooming in the autumn, personally I don't think it makes much difference what you do. They're going to bloom in the autumn because that's their time. And yet others might not bloom, they'll miss a year. And perhaps that drop in temperature could have kicked them into bloom that year. But with Phalaenopsis, you've got no storage units, effectively. Thick fleshy leaves, yeah, they can hold a bit in the nutrients and hydration front, but no canes or pseudobulbs. So they need feeding constantly if they're growing, and most of the time they are. They're either growing roots and or leaves or pushing a spike up. They're growing. So they need a trickle of feed all the time. Some say they're very high feeders and they need quite a high level of feed all the time. Go steady if you take that route, because if they don't use it all in the pot, it will accumulate, turn your media acidic, and if you get a level of feed in a pot that's great enough, the orchid roots will reject it. So the process that allows the feed to go into the root, it'll get rejected because the balance between what it hasn't got and what's outside and what it thinks it needs is wrong. It's too high. But it is said they like a higher level of feed. Mine don't get high levels of feed, they get the same as everything else. That's probably why they're not blooming. We shall see. And you will also get in amongst those store-bought ones, you will get summer bloomers that push their spikes up in spring and push those on into the summer and then bloom in the summer months. And if that's when they bloom, that's when they're probably going to bloom each year. Some of them have lost that cycle. It's been beaten out of them through hybridization processes, and they will bloom when they flipping like, and sometimes 2 times a year. They'll just keep pushing spikes up now and again. And sometimes a new spike comes and the old one hasn't even finished yet. Yeah? I always remember this about Rick, with his feeding programs and things. I mean, you know, there's a lot of knowledge there. And a lot of people still go back to those videos for refreshers. Good on you, because you know that was good information. But he fed his Phalaenopsis quite high, and you know he said nutrients, 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 and get that calcium in there. They seem to like more calcium than other types of orchids. So calcium, calcium, calcium. And I always remember sort of thinking, well, have you got any proof of this, Sunshine? You know me, I'm a disbelieving tyke. And he'd taken his plants in, because the temperatures would have been too cold in the winter and possibly too wet with the rain and everything. So he'd taken them in and set up a room inside. And he said, well, have a look at the Phalaenopsis. And he picked the first one up, it had 8 spikes. I think he could safely rest his case. I've only ever had 1 at a time. And then some of those haven't been very good. Yeah. So when you see it working, that's the person to listen to. But make sure you take note of the environment in which it's working, because in somebody else's environment that might not work. Always have to stand back and say, but where are these being grown? Yeah, I mean, he used inorganic media, stones, river pebbles, bits of lava, all sorts of stuff, but inorganic. And his plants were outside for, in most cases, most of the year. So they were getting rained on frequently. And if you get water through that type of media, there are no nutrients left. It's washed clean, it's gone. So he used to feed a hell of a lot more often than I would ever do, because he was replenishing what had just been washed out by the previous shower, you know. So if he had a heavy shower, he'd be out there with the feed, getting some back in there. So different environments, but that was good stuff. Then we get to the Vanda types. Now, first up there is the Aerangis. Careful there. Some Aerangis are from Madagascar, endemic. Some are Central Southern Africa. Some are both, but not that many. And there's another island, or 2 islands I think, north of Madagascar that have also got some Aerangis. So that area of the world. And they vary a lot. From deep shade, some Aerangis have only ever been found on 1 or 2 types of trees and have never been found growing on any other type of tree. That's a pretty unique requirement. Think about it. Is your cork bark going to work? Maybe not. A fair few Aerangis is classed as short-lived plants. So you may lose one and it's not your fault. It's just been around 10, 15 years or whatever the time scale is. I don't know. But when it's classed as short-lived, what do they mean? Does it bloom for a couple of years and then die? Or does it bloom for 20 years and then die? Because most orchids have not got an end game. As long as they're looked after and have a place to extend their growths without falling off the edge of the world, like falling off the tree, they'll live forever. Yeah? But Aerangis have an exception there. There are definitely some short-lived ones. And then there are others that have never been found growing anywhere but on bare bark. So they do not want moss on their roots. Yeah? They're sensitive. Yeah? So, and they can grow from river valleys, so they're under the tree cover, but high humidity, near running water, all that sort of stuff. Some are found growing at the bottom of trees in heavy evergreen forests, so they are very, very shaded. And some are found quite a way up the trees, much brighter light. Yeah? So they have a variety of temperature ranges, shade light levels, all that sort of stuff, humidity levels. Yeah? I've always said I have an encyclopedia of Aerangis. Somebody other, Lacroix, I think, wrote that. It's like an authoritative document, basically, and all the species are in there, and a couple of hybrids, but there aren't many. So if anybody ever wanted a bit of information on an Aerangis species, I will gladly look it up for you. But all I will do is give you the information that's in that book. Yeah? So it's not mine, it's not due to experience, it's what the book says. But it's an authoritative work by a very, very renowned orchid grower who went out there and did some of it. That's the difference. They didn't read 3 other people's books and copy bits of it and make their own book. They went out there and did it. That's important. Right, so we got the Aerangis, then we've got the Rhinantheras. We got 3 of those, one of which we did have 4, one we did lose, one we nearly lost and have managed to recover it, and one of them I think might be big enough to flip in bloom next year. Now come on, I want to see some of these blooms. That's a reasonable sized plant. It's got a lot of roots, some of which are still actively growing. We've got lovely pinky red root tips on this one. And come on, let's have some flipping blooms. But I suspect it'll have to wait for the longer days and the warmer temperatures. The 2 of the ones I got are species that are renowned for being heat tolerant the other way. So they will put up with less heat than they would prefer. That way, you know. A lot of things, like you get a Masdevallia that's heat tolerant, is because it will put up with more heat. The 2 of these species put up with less and still grow okay, but high light. Yeah, probably wouldn't bloom in the home unless you had a really good window to put them in. So that's those. And then I've got 2 actual Vandas, one of which is in bloom, but I'm not getting it down because it's a... Oh, go on. Let's at least show one flipping bloom today. After all, it is Sunday, isn't it? And I've only got to move 1 plant, so that's not bad, is it? But this is the big blue. It's lost 1 or 2 blooms recently, so it's going to go soon. But it was a pretty good spike this time round. And these blooms grow considerably from the point they open to the, you know, like now, when they're thinking about going over the next week or 2. They at least half as big again to the bloom size for within the first week. And this missed a year. So this didn't bloom last year at all, but I think it's sort of made up for it this year. 1 year, it actually bloomed twice. It actually bloomed in the summer and then pushed up another spike that went right on into winter. So it has bloomed twice in 1 year. But this year, just the one, and as I said, it's going to go over soon. Don't you fall down. Goes back up there with the Vanda in the brightest light I've got, which is right next to the roof. This could be a problem wherever I go in somebody else's conservatory, because I'm not going to be able to make holes in it. So getting wires up near the roof and things like that, we'll have to have a plan B. I have that plan B. We have the technology. It might need a few purchases, but not the end of the world. And then my last section is sort of zygo related, including the Zygopetalums. But my Pabstia's in there, it is a relative. And so is my let me see if I can say this right, Vasa vixella, I believe. But I think originally that's a Polish word. So W's are said as V's and things like that. So I'm told. That was how I was told to pronounce it by somebody who knows, I hope. I've put that in with the Pabstia and the Zygos because it's, even if it's not related, it grows in a similar fashion and needs the same sort of care. Now, due to Michael McCarthy's elaboration on how his Zygos were growing and how well they are doing, again, if you see something working, take it on board and if necessary adapt it. But he was growing his in much brighter light and at much warmer temperatures than the recommendations. His logic was their roots are sensitive to rot, but by keeping them a bit warmer and a bit brighter, you give them more vigour. They respond to it very well. Other plants may not, other orchids may not, but they do. So they become more vigorous and use up the moisture in the pot quicker. So the roots don't rot. Nonetheless, they need to drink. The only time I would say you'd be pushing your luck is if you've lost your temperatures and your day lengths and that plant's not growing at the moment. That's a good time to lose your roots, I would suggest, if you keep them soggy. So again, adjust to your environment, yeah? But mine don't seem to be doing too bad at the moment. At least they're all still here. That's a first, isn't it? You know, I mean, probably over the last 5 years, I think it's 4 I've actually killed. Most of them were killed following a repot. So, you know, you wait for the blooms to go over, you look for some new growths, you repot it, lose your old roots, and you haven't got any new ones, down they go. Time of year comes into that as well. You could be unlucky and get all your new growths at the beginning of winter when you've lost your day length and, you know, and your temperatures. So, whatever. So those are they. Now in amongst that, things that affect care are potting media and whether it's in a pot or on a mount. That affects care. Mounted orchids get watered and fed more frequently than those in pots. And that becomes very apparent this time of year. My ordinary pots now, not the holy clay ones, the ordinary pots, they're on about an 8 or 9 day cycle already. That's how frequently they're getting watered. And some of those get picked up, looked at and think, nope, you're still damp, you're not getting any. You'll have a dry spell, so be it. Cooler temperatures, shorter days. They're not going to go over. They're far more likely to lose their roots if I watered that plant when it was still damp. Because if 8 days ago it was watered and it hasn't used it up yet, it's not, you know, chances are it's not growing much and it doesn't need it. My mounts are down to 3 days with bright days, but the bright days are now no longer relevant because the sun comes around here for a short period and disappears behind that big tree. By the time it comes out the other end, it's setting. So I'm not getting the heat even when the sun's out. So my mounts are now 4 days and sometimes 5. So below this needs water every day. They don't. They're not all shrivelling up. I mean, a lot of them aren't growing anyway. I mean, I've got my winter resters. They didn't get watered last time round, and that was a 5 day gap. And it'll be another 4 days before they get looked at again, and they'll probably get missed out again. They don't all die through lack of water. However, what I call my cooler, shadier ones, Masdevallias, Restrepias, Draculas, Miltoniopsis, you leave them too dry too long and they'll snuff it. Or they will start to lose roots or start to shrivel. This is true. It's absolutely true. I know that because a bloke up the pub told me. You know, bloke up the pub said, oh, it must be true then. Mounted Dracula. Is it alive? Yes. Is it growing? Yes. Is it pushing out new roots? Yes. Hasn't been watered for 3 days. It's bone dry. So they must never dry out, must they? Bloke at the pub said. Being facetious. Right, I was going to have a quick look at the time, although I hate sticking my nose. Oh, crikey, nearly 50 minutes. That's enough. I expected this to be like 20 minutes. But, you know, in amongst that, hopefully there's a bit of useful stuff for some people. A lot of people will have listened to all of that, I hope, and thought, I know all that. Well, good on you. Once upon a time, I didn't know all that, you know, and other people helped me to get to that point. Now, I don't know everything, far from it, but there's quite a varied collection here. It's evolved over years, and some of my orchid types I've had since the beginning, you know, and some of my orchids go back that far and I've still got. So, yeah, a chat. That's sort of woken me up a bit, I must admit. I still feel yucky, and I'm still going to go and sit at the computer and fire this lot off and sit in the comfy chair. So you might not get this video till sort of 9 o'clock tonight, because if I fall asleep, you know, it's going to, it could be a while. I am very tired and, as I say, yucky. I'm blaming it on my jab. The other two didn't affect me. Arm ache for one day and that was it, gone. And nothing. I mean, the guy next door and his missus, he's army or ex-army. He got blown up in Afghanistan, so he got invalided out of the army with his pension and everything. Blew his back in. And so he's your fit, healthy type, generally speaking. Vaccine knocked him down both times. And him and his kids went to a party and came back with coronavirus and gave it to them too. The kids were fine. The two adults were out for 3 or 4 days. You know, just because you're fit and healthy doesn't mean to say you can't go down with this flipping virus. It can still get you, and it's still there. Yeah. So in your mind, everything you do that's not in your own house with nobody else in it, like me, you think before you do and before you move. We had a funeral. We had about 60 people in what could have been an enclosed space. But we had some very high-tech air cleaners on the go, 2 sets of double doors wide open with the cool air blowing through. Pretty good. Yeah, they did us pretty good. But nonetheless, you know, we then went to another place to have a bit of food and a natter that had no ventilation whatsoever. And don't even think there were any windows. It was like a black hole. Which was good, because it meant most people didn't see the curled up sandwiches on the top. By the time I got up to get some of my sandwiches, I like cheese and pickle with brown bread. It's one of my favourite simplistic sandwiches. Well, I kept getting 1.5 sandwiches where the pickle had started to soak into the bread and stuck to the sandwich next to it, because they were all stacked up vertically. So I ended up with 1.5, and then I thought, well, I'll leave the half there and I'll have another one. I'll have one of those. 1.5 again. They're all stuck together. But at a do like that, it doesn't matter. You just sort of think, we were fed, we had some drinks, we were okay. And let it go at that. Anyway, thanks for listening to the waffle. All the business with subscribers and thumbs up and patrons and stuff, I'm not doing that. Fed up with doing it. You know the talk, you've heard it before. Well, just imagine I've done it. You don't need to hear it again, do you? And I will see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.